in a sundown town, you would feel a certain kind of way.
Right.
But if you're in New Orleans, you're not going to go, I cannot believe the trauma that these people have experienced here. Let me drink another whiskey sour.
I got bad news for you, because like most of these places, even in Maryland, would be ruined for that. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bookish, a casual book club. I'm Sylvia Lee, and as always, joined in the studio by my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Kofi Adiza and Laura Yu, professors of English and all around cool people. Also joined by our producer, Matt, who we love. He's awesome. And today we have a topical episode, and we're talking about effed up books or effed up reads. And before you're thinking, wow, what's happened to you guys? You've really, slid into some dark place. If you've been following along with us, you would have listened to some of our ideas of talking about some of the traumatic books that we've read. But also when I was in Nashville a couple weeks ago and I was sharing this with Kofi and Laura, I had an opportunity to visit Parnassus Books, which is Ann Patchett's bookstore, independent bookstore, and they had a little recommended reads kind of Instagram post, and it was on effed up books. And I thought, hey, this is a really interesting topic, because certainly we don't want to go seeking pain. However, a lot of the novels we read are full of some kind of trauma. And so we thought that might, Laura was mentioning, that might be a really good topic to discuss. Like, why do we read them? Mm-hmm. Why do people write them? And so that's what today's episode is about. And we'll have plenty of recommendations if you would like to, follow along in this sadistic adventure of reading.
Or not.
Or not. Maybe it'll be okay, avoid those books.
Yeah, I always wanted to read that book. Now I know why I don't want to read that
book. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Kofi, first.
Yeah, when I thought about it, I thought there's a couple of ways you can go with, effed up reads. It's, either the writing isn't as strong or the story isn't as clear and it kind of meanders and it loses its thread. Or you could think about the characters. And so I thought about characterization and how certain books, the characters in them are just really messed up. And so the three books that I was going to talk about, and I'm not going to talk long about them, was Faulkner's Absalom, Ken Kesey's One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and surprisingly, F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby.
Oh.
And I think people, well, by people I mean Laura, who was surprised by The Great Gatsby. But I think if you read it and you think about Tom Buchanan and Daisy and their carelessness, and I think that's a kind of theme that runs through these three books, that there's a kind of carelessness and a disregard for others that I think is, apropos to the time, but also something that happens within the human project that, with Absalom, Thomas Sutton wants to create this dynasty and this lasting memory of the Old South while wrestling with the realities of his past and his, he has a mixed-race son who then gets involved with his half-sister, so there's a lot of incestuousness there, and it's a somewhat violent and sad and tragic book. And I read it in graduate school, and I remember talking to my professor about it, and this is a true story. I remember reading the book, finishing the book, and dreaming about the book, and dreaming that I was sort of observing the characters, and it was just such a sad, sad book. But it was also I think it's one of Faulkner's best books. One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it happens in a psych ward, so what could go wrong? So, and plus the movie, is pretty well known with Jack Nicholson, Jack Nicholas, or is it Jack Nicholson? Jack Nicholson is the golfer, right?
No, Jack Nicholas is the golfer.
Yeah, Jack Nicholson, and Jack Nicholson is the actor. Okay,
yes,
gotcha.
I believe so.
I sometimes mix up my white people. They don't always mean to, but sometimes, they understand. They do that to me also. So, in the movie it was really, really good. And now, of course, they do that to Korean women all the time. And so I think that if you've seen the movie, you know how messed up it is because the character that's portrayed is this kind of fun-loving guy. He has issues, but he is thwarting the system. And anytime you thwart a system, just like Mildred thwarted a kind of system within marriage with her husband and Tom Buchanan, or Thomas Sumpton's son thwarting the natural relationships, you're going to have some chaos and trauma. So these three books, I think, represent that for me. And I thought if I had to pick these three, it would be that. And they happen to be written by white men. So I think that also helped too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
But I think also that the three together represent like a range of things that are disturbing to different people, right?
Absolutely.
Like and I when we Googled, for example, like, list of like most disturbing books or traumatizing books or whatever, and we saw the list, and it contains like a lot of different kinds of books, right? So there are the things that maybe horror can be traumatizing or disturbing, including things like body horror, things right that go under that, as well as like dystopian. I saw a lot of dystopian things like The Handmaid's Tale or even 1984 show up in some of these lists, and I don't have the answer, but it did make me think more about what is disturbing to me, right? Like, what are the things that, and when I started thinking about the books that I would want to talk about today, like, these are the titles that came to mind. A Little Life. You all heard me talk about this book. There are so many like TikToks about like somebody coming on and saying, I'm 400 pages in or 200 pages in. Do I continue? Because this is horrible. And then it always falls in the two camps, like people who are like, stop reading now, save yourself, all the way to people who are like, just keep going. It's just a beautiful book, right? In a very horrifying way. But, that book is about this main character, Jude, who just unspeakable and unimaginable, terrible things are done to this person since he's a little boy. And most of the violence is sexual violence or involving those relationships, right? And there are pages that are just actually difficult to read. And then as I thought about some of the other examples for me, they really do have to do with sexual violence. I think those are things like that really make my skin kind of like, I don't know what the expression is, like goosebumps, right? Like it makes me super uncomfortable. And so I thought of things like Lolita, right? That's kind of a book that is on these kind of lists. And if to a certain extent, The Bluest Eye, it's a book that left a real strong impression on me. I read it when I was in high school maybe or early college, and it's one of those books that really shifted my way thinking about what novels can do, right? Like, oh my gosh, like novels can say things like this and talk about things like this and expose things like this about humans. What you said about the human project, right? I think that's what it's doing. So that's one theme, I think, that does show up often in these lists about the type of horror, what is horrifying to a certain person. And the examples that I thought of were around that theme. Yeah.
Those are great examples and great considerations. Yeah. I think for me, the one, probably because it's most recent in my memory, but I find myself gravitating to answer your question about like what type of effed up, horror, like do we, really kind of cringe at or makes our skin crawl, I think for me has to do with these kind of dystopian, but almost like, really, it's very similar, Kofi, to what you were pointing out in those 3 books. So like you choosing The Great Gatsby, actually, I went, oh, because it didn't surprise me at all why you would choose that. I find there's a thread of connection between that plus the things that I see as effed up. And fundamentally, it is how human beings can treat other human beings.
Absolutely.
And at what point do you strip somebody of that humanity? And I think that speaks to a lot of the violence of effed up books as well. You know, you're really subjecting another person to some kind of animal or object or something that is not human. And that to me is what frightens me, I guess. Like it scares me, right? For some reason, I think because it can easily happen. Xenophobia, right? I think does that at its core too. So the book I read recently on the plane actually was George Saunders' collection of short stories. I think it was published in like 2022 called Liberation Day. And the story that is the title story of that collection, Liberation Day, has to do with these people. And if you've ever read George Saunders, like Lincoln in the Bardo, you know that he has this way of manipulating voice or writing characters and voices in such a unique, almost disembodied way, but very skilled at developing their character, right? And that's what I think is so effed up about the writing, too, to answer your question. Is the story effed up? Is it the writing? Is it both? Because he's giving voice to something you don't fundamentally know is human or not in the very beginning pages of the story, but it's a human voice. But the way they're talking about themselves and their experiences is not human because it's these, I thought they were robots kind of pinned to the wall in a recording studio, much like this one, owned by wealthy individuals who can make them speak out like different scenes, right? Like Custer's Last Stand. So it's like you have a movie come to life in your recording studio every night. You can put these, you work on this and you can put this show on for your friends, or your also wealthy friends, so they can see. And come to find out that these are actually human beings. These are real people, but they're plugged into this system in which they are only able to speak a certain way because someone's manipulating that. And then it kind of goes into the ethical implications of that because they themselves don't know that they're human. They have no memory. And it's not until later, Liberation Day, it's not until later that you find out through their own awakening into their consciousness that they had a whole life before this. And they're made to erase that life because they sell themselves. I'm spoiling the story, sorry, y'all. But they sell themselves to resolve some kind of financial thing that they had. And so, you know, one of the characters is like, oh, my name is George. I'm from Michigan. I had a wife and like 3 kids. And you're, as a reader, kind of like, it is very disturbing. I find it similar to that show Black Mirror. I don't know if you guys have watched it. There's a new season out, and my husband and I decided to just watch the first episode. And as we're watching the first episode, I'm like, I know where this is going. I don't like where this is going. And in essence, you know, it's a subscription service you pay to stay alive, basically. And so because you literally need to stay alive, they can, you know where this is going. What are they going to do? They're a profit model. They're going to they're going to jam the speed of the signal and jack up the, you know, and you know where this is going. And at the end of that episode, my husband looked at me, he goes, why did we watch that?
Let's talk about that.
Yes,
why?
That's exactly what I want to talk about.
Why do we seek out, or even if you don't seek it out, you let's say you stumble upon it or something and you read it or you watch it or whatever. Like, why am I watching this? And there was like an interesting Reddit thread about this idea of somebody proposing, like, is reading this kind of stuff an endorsement of the thing that's going on? And then, of course, there was like a interesting debate among the Reddit responders, like saying, no, like it's not an endorsement. And actually somebody brought up Lolita as an example. It's and what this person said was, it was interesting. They said, it's not an endorsement of what the guy is doing to this little girl, but an sort of a exposing of and learning about human capacity for their behaviors, the way they think, the way they feel, and how that plays out in the world, right? And so I thought that was like, thank you, that made me feel better about why I read it, right? Like, why did I read that? But that's sort of the question we have been struggling with, thinking about, like, why do we either seek it out, I remember there was like a series, like a period of time when we were reading a lot of stories about like Korean American novels, and they seem to all come with some sort of like family trauma or historical trauma. And I remember at one point, like, Sylvia, you and I were like, oh, we got to stop reading these books for a while because we are becoming like steeped in this trauma together. So we needed to take a break. So yeah, why do we read them, Kofi?
I don't know. I would, yes, I'm the oracle. Well, I know for me, I don't think I would have read Absalom if I wasn't in graduate school. It wasn't the book that I would go, you know what, I've been dying to read? A book about slavery and a white man's desire to continue to have this legacy. Yeah. That's what I've been looking for. But it was mostly because it's all situational for me. Like with the Ken Kesey, I was in Ann Charter's Beats class. And so we were reading all the different beat writers, starting with Jack Kerouac and reading all the things that Kerouac wrote and some of the, you could say, minor characters. So, I've read stuff from Allen Ginsberg's Howl. Ken Kesey was another one. I guess his name is Nick Cassidy. That might be wrong. But, we had to read all these different books. And I think with graduate school, and particularly for me being at University of Connecticut, it was a different headspace. I read Great Gatsby, and not even in high school. I read it in undergrad, and I was like, eh. But in graduate school, it was a little more. It was a bit different. There was another book I could have used, which was J.R., written by William Gaddis. And I was in a class called Literature and BS, but it was spelled out.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a very good, we read a lot of different things, and I was telling our colleague Brian about it. And it was about what constitutes literature, capital L, and what's constitute BS. And there's really no, it's really about the system and the structures that say that these are great books. And I think that for me, reading these types of books and reading books outside of academia, I find myself gravitating to these works that really look at the human condition. And even though we did the trashy novel and, the romantic, and I think would have had the
fantasy genre.
All these different genres, it's something about reading tragedy, reading horror, or reading, effed up situations that either adds a kind of perspective to your lived situation, or it gives you language to talk about things. And it's also why I can understand people banning books, because that type of perspective calls into question a lot of behaviors that, in the political world at least, sometimes do not get called out by either the media or by other politicos. So I think that there's a combination of reasons. I never thought it was an endorsement. I never thought it when I was reading something, I was like, oh, I must be endorsing this. I always thought like, this is saying something that I never really thought about.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It makes me think of that. I think it's a line from Things Fall Apart, something like, there's no story that is not true, right? And I think it has to do, for me, it speaks to emotional truths, right? So even if we're looking at science fiction, things that are not, quote unquote, not true, in the heart of it, there's something true there about what humans are capable of, good or bad, right? And I think sometimes when we see the really, really bad, as opposed to the good stuff, like we've done an episode about the joyful reading, right? Delightful readings as well. There's like such a range of our emotional capacity for that. So I do, like, for example, there was a period of time, a few years, where I was obsessed with novels that were set in the Holocaust context, right? Like, so it's disturbing, right? And it's traumatizing. And again, it's sort of like on a binge though, right? And then I go through maybe 2, 3, 4 novels and then I'm like, okay, I have to stop now and move on to something else. And I think there is value in coming to contact with things that make us uncomfortable, maybe, right? To sort of, maybe it's not so good to just ignore all of that, right? Probably not healthy to be confronting that like 24/7 all the time, all the days of your life. But I think there's value in kind of facing it too. Yeah.
Definitely. I think both of you are speaking to the core reason why why authors continue to write these stories and why we continue to read them. One, especially don't think we're always seeking it out, except for maybe in the case of A Little Life, because people have been warned, like all over TikTok and Instagram, what that book is about, and they'll still go for it out of curiosity. But a lot of times we don't know, we just know that there's a story here, and we might be reading it. You know, I just knew that I like Saunders, and I like his writing, and I was curious about this collection. I'd heard good things. But you're right, it tells us something about the human condition, and it reveals some kind of core emotional truth that we do need to confront, we do need to face and know that it exists. Because I think out there, I think ultimately what it does is it prepares us for what is outside, what is external in our real world, right? That these things exist, right, out there, which is really horrible to think about. But that's exactly it. You have to be realistic about the fact that these things exist. We can't take for granted that these things are happening out there. I think there was a podcast in which the person was saying, you know, one of the greatest lies we tell ourselves is that it could never happen to us, right? But I think what these books, as you read more and more of them, reveal is Laura is...
She's all choked up.
She's all choked up by these up reads.
So sorry.
But yeah, I think that these stories, these effed up books serve a real purpose beyond just depressing us. But it does show us, it's almost like a warning, a mirror almost reflected in our lives and in our worlds, the condition that we find ourselves in. So, yeah.
Yeah, you know, even though I never read this book, but I did see the movie, and I think it may be true in the book as well. Pet Sematary, I always thought that was really about bad parenting. And that when you're not paying attention and you're not being responsible, terrible things will happen. First, it's with a cat. You're not paying attention, the cat gets smushed. Yep. So you want to be a good parent, you try to resolve it, but the way you resolve it it's kind of effed up. Yep. And then next thing you know, Gage is running and you can't catch him, and that truck is speeding down. Oh, no. So, you know, I think, and even with The Shining.
And even with it.
Yeah, it's like I think a lot of these, it's bad parenting. Like, this seems to be Stephen King's critique. Yeah. That bad parenting will lead to these traumatic events that are often affected by children. Our children are often affected. And I think that is, you know, one of those things. And I remember saying this to somebody, and they were like, I don't know if that's true. And I'm like, think about it. Yeah. You know, the father, all he had to do, if he just paid attention to the cat, he would have never, ever had to learn that sometimes dead is better. Yeah.
So essentially, it's a parenting book.
Yes.
I mean, The Shining as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so and I think sometimes movies help put you towards the book. When I was talking to our colleague Brian, and I mentioned the Literature and Crap book, the guy who was leading the discussion is Scott Bradford. I think he's an amazing writer, but he was heavy into Chester Himes, which was kind of odd, but not odd that he was in it, but he was like really in it.
Yeah.
And he was really. I took a couple of classes with him, and we read Cotton Comes to Harlem. We read a lot of Chester Himes books. And, he did have a different take on Toni Morrison's Beloved. And he couched it that he understood the sort of cultural and the critical aspects of what Toni Morrison is doing. But then he drilled down to, as a story, as a ghost story, it just doesn't hold up. It's like, oh man, you're going to be in the hot seat.
I'm feeling myself react a certain way, and I'm trying to understand that reaction, especially coupled with the information that he was really into Chester Himes.
And
how do you feel about that?
Yeah, and so, but I think in those different spaces, you begin, or all of us begin, and if you become, avid readers, certain genres would definitely fit your fancies. The romance novels is just not my fancy because they just seem too fantastic.
Well, I feel like because that serves a different purpose than the effed up books. I feel like the romance and the fantasy, it really serves as an escape. And people need that too, and I think that's why there's such a big following, because it's like, you know what? I just want something light. I just want something that's completely kind of activates this part of my brain that is perhaps unrealistic, and part of them knows that. Versus the effed up books, I feel like that is not for that purpose. It's not for escapism. God, I hope not. People need to get checked out if that's what they're using that for. But it's for very much like dragging you into like the depths of the human soul and condition, which is not somewhere, to your point, Laura, that you want to dwell too frequently. But I feel like the different books might serve a different purpose in that way.
And in some of these stories that might be traumatic, we also see glimpses of good, right? Like, so when terrible things are happening to a character, for example, like you'll see that their friends or family or somebody or something happens that also reveals the good in people, right? Even as we're reading about the bad in people too.
Right.
I was asking on Facebook, hey, what are some most effed up, traumatizing, disturbing books you've read? And a couple of people mentioned the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, Colson Whitehead?
Yeah, and Nickel Boys as well. And
Again,
I did find Nickel Boys really hard to read. Yeah. And I haven't had the courage to watch the movie yet. And I heard the movie is great, but I don't know. And somebody mentioned Friday Black, which we've done I think it was one of our earliest episodes.
Yes.
And the story in that, the first story, it was so disturbing, I guess. One of my students who wrote their paper on it was angry in the paper. He said, this is irresponsible. It's perpetuating this stereotype about Black Americans and violence and all of that. And I have to say, it is not a reaction I normally get from students who write about it. And I wasn't expecting it. But the paper was so good, right? Like, despite his anger, he made a really, really great case about his reaction to that. But that a lot of people have described that as being disturbing, right?
I think that because that was on my short list to bring up in this episode for the same reason as as George Saunders is, because I feel like that book also delves into like almost a dystopian future.
Yeah.
It's not really science fiction. It's not magical realism, but it's somewhere in that sort of crossover.
Kind of like speculative fiction.
It's speculative fiction. That's what it is. And it's just far removed from reality, but grounded in it, that it is able to show us what we're like at our worst. And so I thought, I am glad I'm not surprised to see that mentioned in the Facebook.
Yeah. And then Kindred. Yeah. Somebody mentioned Kindred, A Little Life, Misery was another one.
You talking about Stephen King's movie?
Yeah.
Yep, another parenting book.
There you go. I was just thinking that. Like, okay, there you go.
But I have to confess, when I was reading The Underground Railroad, I thought it was real. And I remember asking my husband, like, did this happen? Like, they had like railroads under the ground?
He wrote it so well, he made you question your
It really did. And
knowledge of
I
history.
felt so stupid. And then Frank was looking at me like, are you kidding me? Are you? Is that a real question? And then he had to explain it. I was like, okay. But that's how good it was.
Yeah, and the reason why I think one of the folks gave in response to that was because it kind of ruined the Deep South for them. So they can't ever like visit without seeing it as like a place, like the geography of it as just a place of trauma. And I can understand that for sure.
She said the Underground Railroad was the most disturbing to me in that it brought brutally real history alive in ways I'll never forget. It destroyed any desire to travel in the Deep South again. I see no beauty in that landscape anymore, only trauma. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Oh, well, that's not right.
Yeah.
That's great that the book did that. But, I aspire to have a pen like that. But I think that sometimes I think when we do experience these things and we make these kind of statements, there's still people there, and that
of course
that particular it's just like any kind of event that is even within the American context or in any European or Asian or African context, what you're really dealing is the trauma of just being a human.
Yes.
And you can never escape our humanity, and what that means is still up in the air. And I can imagine if you're a person of color or African American and you're driving in a sundown town, you would feel a certain kind of way.
Right.
But if you're in New Orleans, you're not going to go, I cannot believe the trauma that these people have experienced here. Let me drink another whiskey sour.
I got bad news for you because like most of these places, even in Maryland, would be ruined for you.
Exactly,
I can't go to many places in Annapolis if I'm using that like type of.
And of course, like as we said, like there's the antidote to that, which is there are also movies and books and about beautiful things that happen everywhere.
Resilience.
And it's sort of but again, the exposure of it, right? Like to come face to face with a fictionalized in books and movies a version of what is good and bad, I think is
So on that note, we're going to wrap up this eventful episode. And I will leave our readers with this, right? Because we're all going to continue to read effed up books. But the irony is, I think, as we read these books and think about it, we ourselves become less effed up, in the sense that I think it just attunes us to humanity even more. Hopefully it's making us more compassionate as we're looking out around us, too, and seeing other people, recognizing their humanity. So I'm going to wrap us up with that little nugget.
You're ending on a positive note.
I'm trying to lay down positive neural pathways for us. It's been a great episode. Thank you for joining us. Please catch us anywhere you subscribe to your podcasts. And you can download episodes as well and catch us on Facebook. Till next time, this has been Kofi, Laura, and Sylvia.
Bye-bye.
See ya.